Hello and welcome to Serious Coin, the podcast where we have rich conversations about wealth. I'm Kelly Willis Green. One of the things I love most about doing this podcast is the opportunity to meet fascinating people and learn new things and share them. And in this episode, we are exploring the latest investment that the uber wealthy are making to diversify and reduce risk. It's not hedge funds or handbags or watches or cryptocurrencies. It's passports. I mean, who knew, right? I sure didn't. So here's what's happening. As global uncertainty looms ever larger, ultra-high net worth families are developing a plan B. They want to have a secure sanctuary in a time of crisis, and they want ultimate global mobility, something you'll remember we were all denied during the pandemic. They're achieving this through residence or citizenship by investment programs. Now, we're going to talk all about this, but these schemes are not without controversy, and we'll discuss that as well in this episode. But they may be a look into the future of wealth management, where citizenship is the new global currency. My guest is Dominic Volek. Dominic is Group Head of Private Clients at Henley Partners, and Henley is the global leader in residence and citizenship by investment programs. Dominic's originally from South Africa, currently living in Dubai, although admittedly, he spends his time hopscotching around the globe, meeting with clients in Henley's 45 different offices. Have a listen as we delve into these programs, how they work, and why a portfolio of passports is the new must-have asset.
So these countries and governments are looking to raise foreign direct investment. And so if they find individuals that are looking to get residence or citizenship, and of course they need to pass very stringent due diligence tests and various other anti-money laundering and that type of thing, they can become residents and citizens of that country, critically for most of our clients, without having to physically move to another country, learn another language. So that's the real attraction.
So it's an option to reside. You don't actually have to move.
Correct. There's about 40 different countries that offer these types of programs. They all have slightly different requirements. So some may require you to spend significant time in order to perhaps eventually become a permanent resident or get a green card or citizenship. Others offer a more direct route to citizenship or residence with little to no physical presence or language requirements. So each country is quite unique in terms of what they offer. Historically, the main driving force for interest in acquiring a second citizenship and a second passport has really been driven from more sort of emerging markets, Russia, China, Bangladesh, India, Nigeria, South Africa. And the primary driver was looking for an insurance policy. You know, if I'm living in a country that has a certain level of political or economic uncertainty or security threats, I need a plan B for me and my family. And so if I'm wealthy, I can acquire citizenship or residence in another country as a backup plan if and when I need it. The other big driver, particularly from the countries I mentioned earlier, is looking for a better passport in terms of their travel freedom. So not everyone is fortunate enough to be born in Europe or the US or Canada or Australia and have these passports at birth that are actually incredibly strong in terms of their global mobility and the access it gives you, to 150, 180 different countries. So if you're like me, born in South Africa, and I have what's known as the green mamba, the green passport, it's not a very good travel document. And so I need to go through the painstaking process of applying for a visa if I want to come to the US. It took me 11 months to get my visa last year. Just to come to the US, I had to apply for a visa, pay a couple $100, and wait 11 months to get my appointment at the embassy. And I could not come to the US. So that's been a big driver, is people like myself, as well as people in the Philippines, in Pakistan, that don't have the travel freedom. And so they look at countries that offer citizenship by investment. And the really popular ones there are the Caribbean, which we can touch on, where I can donate $100,000, provide all the necessary paperwork, and my whole family can get a second passport from Antigua and Barbuda, as an example. And those passports give me now visa-free access to Europe, to UK, to Singapore, to Hong Kong. And so I'm expanding my global access to opportunities for business, for lifestyle, just by acquiring a second passport.
Now, the programs may have started with people from emerging countries in mind, but I think there's really been a shift in the last decade or so, hasn't there, where people from developed countries are using these. Tell me about who is using them today.
Exactly. So of course, the demand from the emerging markets has only increased as the industry has become a bit more mainstream and people are much more educated about this option. But now what we've seen, I would say, over the last decade, but especially over the last sort of 4 or 5 years after certain global events have happened in developed markets. So, we had Brexit not so long ago where UK's British citizens lost their settlement rights in the European Union. And so now all our clients in the UK, they look to get golden visas in Portugal and Spain and Greece and Italy because they can no longer go and live there and spend as much time as they want. So Brexit was one that impacted a lot of clients in the UK. Then in the US, which is now actually our single biggest jurisdiction for new clients. So we have more American clients each year now than any other nationality. And of course, that's not about travel freedom, but it is a bit more about Plan B and the stereotypical insurance policy. And that started in COVID, really, the US, when, of course, it was an event that no one expected. And so wealthy people like to hedge against such things. And so what happened during COVID was in the initial lockdowns, Europe said Americans cannot enter Europe. And so if I'm a very wealthy billionaire and I have a few private jets and lots of financial resources available to me, that did not matter. If I only had my American passport, I could not go to Europe, whether it was for business or some type of an emergency. So I think a lot of wealthy people in the US realized they were possibly more fragile than they thought, holding this, very strong American passport. That same year, of course, was the election. And whenever there's an election year, like we see ramping up again this year, things, could go either way. And you have, certain, members on the Republican side that don't like the Democrats and wealth taxes and various possible reforms that might come in, and vice versa. If the Trump administration comes back in, there's lots of concerns around that. And so, both sides are concerned that the other one does something, and therefore I should have a plan B. What is my strategy if I don't like the way America goes? And of course, it's not unique to America; it's everywhere. And so then, fast forward to a year or so ago, 18 months, and Ukraine and Russia, their conflict kicks off. And now all of a sudden, all the Europeans realize, well, I should have a plan B. So all of our clients in Asia and Africa want to get some sort of residence and citizenship in Europe. But now it's the other way around. And so the Germans and the French are calling us and saying, well, what have you got in South America? What's available in Southeast Asia? Something that's actually far away from Europe. And so that's really what it boils down to now. There is still the big driver for travel freedom, but the fact that having at least one more residence and citizenship, but ideally a portfolio of them, it's the optionality that most people are interested in.
Now, this was sounding like a lot of global shuffling of passports like baseball cards. Americans looking for a plan B in Europe, Europeans seeking shelter in Asia or Africa, and vice versa. What's the net effect of all of this? And which countries have net inflows and which are experiencing net outflows?
So we do actually track millionaire migration. We've got a lot of great reports and indexes that we put out. And one of them is the Private Wealth Migration Report, where we track the movements of millionaires around the world. So these are those, obviously, millionaires that physically move to another country for more than 6 months. And that would, of course, have certain tax implications. And of course, there was a consistently growing trend of millionaires moving up until we hit COVID, and then we had a 2-year sort of blip during that process. But we're already up to pre-COVID levels, and we estimate this year, probably there'll be 140,000, 150,000 millionaires physically migrating around the world. So that trend continues. And of course, with that, we also analyze which countries are seeing a net outflow and which countries are seeing a net inflow.
So what are they?
Right at the top typically are places like Singapore, Australia, the United Arab Emirates, Switzerland. If you look at the top 10 that have net inflows of millionaires, 9 of the top 10 offer an investment migration program, some form of residence or citizenship in return for a significant investment. And that's typically the route that these high net worth individuals use to get access to these countries. On the net outflows, I guess the usual suspects would be there. Of course, there's lots of tension in that in places like China and India. 2 years ago, Russia was at the top of the list. Ukraine came into the top 10 for a while. And so that is quite a dynamic thing. Interestingly, last year, the UK was in the top 5. And so that was something, I guess, that was quite surprising, that you have a place like the UK that has a net outflow of millionaires these days.
Shocking, really. I'm glad you mentioned Australia, because for a time anyway, Australia and New Zealand were often named as the apocalyptic plan B countries. They were far enough away,
Yes.
particularly for Americans, far enough away, English speaking, beautiful. And then I heard, they kind of, New Zealand at least, shut down.
Yeah, so historically, both of them have had very successful investor visas available. So it's not directly for citizenship. They offered residence by investment. And if you really physically went and lived there for at least 5 years and passed the citizenship test, you could eventually naturalize and get a passport as well. But as you rightly said, a lot of our clients, particularly in the US, it's sort of considered, New Zealand especially, as the sort of billionaire's bolt hole, right? It's what we see with a lot of the sort of centi-millionaire, net worth of 100 million plus, and billionaires, is their key strategy now is to actually develop a portfolio of residence and citizenship around the world, because that's how I truly hedge against all the sort of geopolitical events that go on. So it's not enough just to have citizenship of Malta and access to Europe, but I should get a Caribbean passport, maybe a Dubai golden visa, and then, of course, the real doomsday scenario solution, as you said, residents down in Australia and New Zealand. So both of them have programs. The Australian one at the moment is not accepting applications, and so that's changing. New Zealand also had 2 options. There was a 3 million and a 10 million option. A lot of billionaires, as part of that doomsday prep, would put the 10 million into an actual commercial farm that was, off the grid from an electricity perspective, not reliant on any sort of public water solutions. And so it was a completely self-sustaining farm with residents in New Zealand. So that was the ultimate package. They did remove those 2 options, and they currently still have their premium visa that's available. And the investment ranges between 5 and 15 million New Zealand dollars, depending on what you invest into. And so obviously, the way these governments typically work is the higher risk, the lower the investment. So you could, as a very basic example, stick 5 million into a venture capital fund that then invests and brings benefits to New Zealand. Or you could, stick 15 million into a corporate or government bond that is relatively low risk.
There's so many options when it comes to putting together a robust plan B. You have to remember there are 40 different countries that offer these programs. Some offer residency status only, others a path to citizenship. If you're curious, Henley has a tool on their website called the Ultimate Portfolio. It allows you to go in and choose your own adventure. Every country is ranked according to a bunch of different factors, from safety to global access, and you can put together your own theoretical portfolio of passports. So I asked Dominic, what would be the ultimate passport portfolio, and how much would it cost?
I would say in the US, the most typical combination is often a Caribbean passport with some type of presence in Europe. And so in Europe, again, it does come down to the financial capacity of someone that's considering these programs. As a very broad benchmark, we typically don't see clients investing more than sort of 10 to 20% of their net worth into one of these programs. So that means if you look at the Caribbean as an entry level, if I'm willing to donate $100,000 to $200,000 to get second citizenship for my family, I've got to be worth probably minimum, 2 to 5 million US net worth. And then at the very top end, we can assist clients get citizenship in Austria. That starts at about 3.5 million euros up to 10 million euros. Malta has a very interesting option for about 1 million euros. And so those are European Union. So those are really the top shelf of what's available to investors, because not only do you get a very good passport from a travel perspective, but because they're members of the European Union, I have complete settlement rights across all 27 European Union members. So I can acquire citizenship in Malta and I can go and live in Germany, and my kids can go and study in France. And without any additional work permits or student permits, I'm effectively a European citizen. And so that is the ultimate flexibility, optionality for a high net worth individual. But it, of course, comes with a larger capital requirement as well.
Is the same true that by acquiring residence by investment in Malta, that you have the same freedom to live in France?
No. So Europe consists of, at the moment, 3 citizenship by investment programs where you can acquire citizenship through an investment without any long-term physical residence or language and that type of thing. And that is Austria, Malta, and also Turkey. So Turkey is not part of the European Union. It actually sits across Europe and Asia, but it's Europe, and you can acquire citizenship in Turkey. So those are the only 3 in Europe that are direct to citizenship by investment. And it's only European citizenship that gives you this complete settlement rights across the bloc.
Got it.
Then if you look at residence by investment, there's a lot more. So there you have Portugal, Spain, Greece, Latvia, Italy. They all have residence by investment, and these are often called golden visas, where similar principle, I invest. That can go into, often it's real estate, sometimes it's a venture capital fund, sometimes it's a non-refundable contribution. So those are the 3 sort of most popular options. And depending on which country, the option's either available or not. But you make the investment. It's a lower investment, so usually anywhere between 250 to 500,000 euros. And that gives me residence of that specific country. So I can go and live in Spain. So if I have a Spain or Greece golden visa, I can go to one of the other European countries without a visa. I can go for business. I can go for a holiday, but I can't just go and live there, get a job, my kids go to school. That's only available when you have the European citizenship and passport.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that. And so do people maintain dual citizenship when they apply for these other programs, or are they also giving up citizenship in their home country?
So it's a very good question, and it very much depends on their original country of nationality, because a lot of countries don't allow dual citizenship. This is particularly prevalent in Asia. So places like Singapore, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, they don't allow dual citizenship, and it's strictly controlled. But if you look at the Western world, most of Europe, the US and Canada allows dual citizenship. So it's very unpopular for those nationals to get an alternative and renounce. They just get a second or sometimes a third and a fourth citizenship. The US can be different, because if someone really wants to exit the tax net in the US, they would need to get an alternative, and there are a small minority that do actually renounce their American citizenship for tax reasons, all legally and all very validly. But if you're wealthy, that is also can be a very complex and expensive process in terms of really exiting the US. So it is done, but it's not really a huge trend as some sort of media portray it to be.
Yes. And I think the same is true in Canada, although we don't tax on citizenship, but there would be pretty hefty exit costs to leave Canada, would there not?
Correct. And of course, a lot of clients are concerned that changes, right? Because particularly coming out of something like COVID, where all these governments have had to put out significant job support schemes and various economic stimulation packages. Governments are looking for money as well, right? And one way they can do that is to find ways to extend the tax net. So we do actually have conversations with more ultra high net worth individuals that in Canada, in the US, in Australia, that get an alternative citizenship as a backup if Canada or Australia decides to change the rules and start taxing citizens. Then at least they already have a Malta or an Austria available to them, and they can renounce their existing. So it's also like a bit of a backup strategy in case of future tax policy changes.
In addition to that outlay of capital to the issuing country, obviously there are fees to make these arrangements. Dominic told me Henley's fees range from, say, $5,000 for a simple option, like a 20-year residence in Thailand, for example, up to a couple of $100,000 for more complicated programs involving multiple family members. But just like putting together an investment portfolio, it all comes down to the individual client's needs.
We understand exactly what their objective is, because that can also vary. Is it just a better travel document? Is it access to Europe? Is it education? Is another big driver for a lot of our clients considering these programs. And so once we understand the family profile, what their objective is, we can quite quickly narrow down from the 40 odd options there are to probably one or two that meet those objectives.
Switching gears a moment, these programs are controversial, right? I mean, they're a wonderful source of revenue for the issuing countries, but they can also drive up real estate prices. I know Portugal's seen a real estate bubble, and I think that's prompted the government to make changes to their program. There's said to be a security risk in some cases where proper vetting is not being done. I know the UK has called out Dominica for their lack of diligence around applicants. So I think a lot of these programs are changing. Some are being shut down. What do you see happening? What do you think should happen?
Yeah, I think so. So we're the global leader in the space, and we're the biggest player, and we are very, very pro-regulation. So unfortunately, the industry is not regulated, right? And so that means there are a lot of bad players in the industry, and unfortunately, that's just a fact. And as you said, not all programs are designed and administered at the same level either. So there are certainly, areas that need improvement. I think there's a lot more engagement these days. Historically, there was a lot of misunderstanding of the industry. That it was often portrayed as someone giving a government official, $100,000 and walking out with a passport. There's never any coverage of all the due diligence that goes on behind it. If you look at a program like Malta, it takes us 18 months, and there is the most extensive declaration of every single asset you have. How did you go from your first dollar to $500 million, and providing all the documentary evidence. So Malta, I would say, is right at the top in terms of the level of due diligence and disclosures that's required. But for sure, there are certain programs towards the bottom that don't operate at that level. And they are getting caught out, right? And they are losing certain visa-free access. And of course, that brings the whole integrity of that program into question. So we're quite careful in terms of which programs we work with and which governments we work with. And we also try and help them to fix these. But that said, this industry does bring significant benefits to host countries. We refer to it as sovereign equity, right? And so particularly if you look at the Caribbean, a place like St. Kitts and Nevis used to be driven by their sugar industry. And when that sort of collapsed in the 80s, that is when they actually launched their program in 1984. So that's the oldest citizenship by investment program in the world. But for the first sort of 20 years, it was relatively dormant and no one knew about it. And our chairman, Dr. Chris Callan, who's sort of considered the pioneer of the whole industry, he started working with the government in St. Kitts in the 2000s in order to restructure the program, into the model which actually the whole Caribbean follows now. Get the due diligence right, and of course then through our networks globally bring investors. And so that brings significant investment into these countries. They're going into real estate projects. These are typically 4- or 5-star hotel resorts that generate tourism monies. There's also sovereign funds, like hurricane relief funds, sustainability funds that all get plowed back into the island and into infrastructure. And so there's a lot of good news that doesn't probably get enough exposure that these programs bring. But of course, as in any industry, whether it's private banking or anything else, there are unfortunately a small percent of those that get involved that shouldn't be. If you look at what happened in Portugal, so Portugal has had the most successful golden resident permit program or golden visa over the last few years. So that program launched in October 2012, and it's still very much open and available. But that ran for about a decade before there was any real focus on it. Very successful. I think it's raised over 8 billion euros in that period. And about 12,000 investors have done the Portugal Golden Visa. And of those 12,000, about 95% did the real estate route. There's a venture capital route, there's a job creation, there's the real estate. So if you look at 12,000 investments over 11, 12 years, is actually not a lot if you break it down. And so wealthy, from a political perspective, wealthy foreigners are also an easy target. And so the focus was all on the golden visa and how it's caused this housing crisis, when actually if you looked at what was driving the prices up in Portugal, it was the fact that they had a very attractive tax regime called the non-habitual tax residence scheme. And that saw a significant number of neighboring European countries flooding into Portugal to buy houses, to live there for 6 months, to become non-habitual residents and benefit from the tax. And so there was this big outcry about the golden visa in real estate during the course of last year. And then at the same time, they've also now announced that they're scrapping this non-habitual tax residence scheme. So that's really what happened in Portugal. And then the whole industry went through a bit of a roller coaster ride throughout of last year, where they initially were going to close the program, but ultimately they didn't, which is, of course, very good news. So the program is very much alive and available. The main thing they did is they removed the real estate option. So now either you can invest 500,000 euros into venture capital funds in Portugal, or you can go through like a non-refundable donation route, which is 250,000 euros. And with that, you get residence in an amazing Mediterranean country. And the most attractive thing for a lot of clients about Portugal is that after 5 years of holding the golden visa, you can apply for Portuguese citizenship with a minimal physical presence and learning a very sort of elementary level of Portuguese.
Well, and you have a lovely lifestyle and a great temperate climate, which I'm looking out at a gray, soupy, foggy mess this morning. I think Portugal seems pretty nice to me right now. This is so fascinating. Thanks so much, Dominic. Before we wrap up, I just want to ask you my usual roundup of rapid fire questions, just to get a sense of your own insights around money.
Okay.
So if you will finish the sentence. To me, money is?
To me, money is not everything, but it can certainly be an enabler and opportunity creator. If I look at our clients who are generally, high net worth individuals and therefore largely financially independent, money certainly gives them and their families options and choices in life, which in most cases they would probably not have without it.
What's the biggest misconception about what it's like to have money?
I guess that it is that life is much easier when you have lots of it, I think, and that it'll always be there. Money is a bit like having a baby. It can bring you great joy, but also many sleepless nights. And once you have it, it's of course a lifelong job to maintain and grow it.
How do you personally define luxury?
For me, luxury is more of a mindset, and it's about having choices and knowing that I can do something or have something if I want it. I think luxury is usually defined more in sort of a material aspect. If something is expensive or exclusive or rare, or you look at the quality or craftsmanship of something. But I think luxury is really having all your needs met, even those that you potentially didn't know that you had, such as, travel freedom and personal access across the world.
Who is someone you admire in terms of how they handle their wealth?
So that's a bit of a tricky one. I probably don't have a name I would give you, but if I look at some of our really wealthy clients, what I admire the most is in terms of how they handle things, is how they handle their next generation in terms of the values and how they perceive value, and they're not spoilt and entitled. And I think that's the really important part of handling wealth, if you have it, is how you teach the next generation to preserve it, but also to live a good life and have good morals.
Well, there you go. This is the 5th season of Serious Coin, and there are still topics I cover that surprise me. I'd heard the term golden visa before, but I never really knew the details, and I certainly didn't know how widespread these programs are. I thought Dominic did a great job of explaining them in a clear and balanced way. If you'd like more information, you can visit Henley Partners' website at henleyglobal.com. Thanks for listening to Serious Coin. If you enjoyed the content, please do share it, tell your friends about it, give it a 5-star rating on your podcast platform. It really helps us to be found by more listeners who want to hear rich conversations about wealth. Serious Coin is provided for your general interest only, and nothing we discuss should be taken as investment, tax, legal, or other professional advice. Always talk to a licensed professional before you make any financial decisions.